So today we're going to talk about group policy infrastructure. So we sort of mentioned this in the 5ICW. We've mentioned it all along, and it's one of the key things of how we control our network and our client computers. Okay, for example, if we wanted to map drives automatically for the L drive. Okay, if we want to map the L drive automatically for you guys, do you think we could run around and manually just map the drives on each of these computers? The answer is no, obviously. And obviously we wouldn't be doing that because there's 80,000 students, and every time someone logs into a new computer, you have to map it. So one simple thing that you can see every day that as you log in is you've got that L drive, and that's mapped because we've configured that in our group policies. Well, with group policies as administrators, it can actually simplify our work quite a lot. For example, if you want to configure a proxy server on all the browsers, Internet Explorer browsers or Edge browsers on our client computers, you don't have to go to every computer and do so manually. You can just configure a group policy. If you look at your desktop image, it's all got the TAFE background. If you want that to be consistent look and feel about your client computers, again, group policy. If you don't want users to be able to change the IP address of the computers, okay, for example, in this classroom you can, because we're doing networking and we require the ability to do so. But if you go to library and you try to change the IP address of the computers, you'll be locked out from doing that. How do we control it? Again, group policies. So there's literally thousands of settings in the group policies that we can actually do something with. And obviously we're not going to be able to teach you what every individual settings in group policy does, because there's just too many of them. We're going to do a few probably easy ones to see that we can see an effect. Like obviously if you do something, you should get a result, shouldn't you? And that's the logical approach. You do something, you get a result. If you don't get the result, why? And that's how we troubleshoot, okay? So today we're going to talk about how group policy works and have a go at implementing some group policies that will have a effect. Easy effect to see. Some things are not easy to see, some things are. For example, a custom desktop image for every computer, easy to see. Other things that might not be so easy to see. So that's what we're going to do. So today we're going to introduce group policies. We're going to implement and administer GPOs or group policy objects, and we're going to use talk about group policy scope and group policy processing and the order of processing, and then obviously troubleshooting group policies if like we said, if we do something and that result is not forthcoming, what can we do? Okay, so let's actually do something. All right, let's do something. I'll give you a demonstration of group policy straight away. So let's switch to my virtual machine. Here's my server. I'll make it full screen. All right, so this is a Server 2016 domain controller like we all have. And this is obviously, hopefully, it's being set up with a few things that we need, just like the users and shares and so forth. So let me just quickly check that. So on my computer, on my C drive, there should be a homes directory with a couple of users with home directories in there. There should be a, student files. All right, so let's have a look at this. So I'm not sure where I left this. So let's have a look at what shares are available on this computer. And obviously I've got the homes, I've got the production, I've got the student files. Okay, and so that's okay. So basically with group policies, what I'm going to try to do is to demonstrate how easy it is just to configure a drive mapping. Okay. So if I check out my users, I think what I've done is actually have some users, but let me just try to understand who these users are, because I use this machine for a couple of things. So there's a user for AWS called Gary Phillips. Okay, there's a couple of users in ICW, and there's obviously some groups as well. Okay, so here's there's the production. So we've got a few things, but let's actually make it so I'll create the groups that I need for accessing the student files. Okay, so if you remember, we start with the GG group to represent the type of users, in this case students. Okay, so this is the type of users, and this guy here, Gary, he's a student, so I'm going to add him to a group. So I'll find the GG students I just created. All right, and obviously there's a resource, and the resource is this student files share. Okay, so the DL group represents the resource and the access level. So I'll go new group again. This time it's a domain local group, and I'm going to denote that by having the DL underscore student files. And because this is a student, I'm using as an example. We're going to make it read execute. Okay, and probably the list is in there somewhere as well, but we don't really have to denote that most of the times. But what this is representing is a domain local group for a resource called student files, and access levels read, list, and execute. Okay, you get me? Sort of the same idea we've been using all along. So I add this. Sorry? Yeah, well, if you name it logically, if you name it in a way that's understandable quite easily, then someone else can follow your footsteps and understand exactly what you're doing. If you use random names like Bob and like Bill and like the group 1, group 2, group 6, how people don't understand that easily unless they intimately know the system. But that's why we always stress the company policy. When you're doing things on your own computer, no one cares. You do it however you want because no one else is going to use it. But when you're doing it in a shared environment where besides yourself, you got other administrators or other users that need to really administer this, you could be hit by a bus, you could just leave for another job, but someone else has to follow in your footsteps and troubleshoot your work or keep up the work. So that's why we stress that there's a policy, a naming convention, a way of doing things. Okay, so even though a lot of times that you guys in your assignments you would have done it exactly right, it works. But at the end of the day, I might give you some feedback to say that, hey, this doesn't make sense to me if I'm just a guy looking at it, and if this is our company policy, maybe you should follow it. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to say. So let's get on with that. So there's the student files, and basically, if you remember, we have the student files on the C drive shares. And I'm gonna go into make sure it's shared correctly. Okay, that's correct from us. And then here, users already got read and execute. So if you remember, we basically disable inheritance but convert it to permissions, direct explicit permissions. And then we actually get rid of the users group because that represents anyone. Okay. But instead, we're going to add the DL student files, read, list, and execute, and give them those exact permissions: read, list, and read and execute. Okay, so that's good. So that gives us access to that share. Okay, and I'm going to turn on my Windows 10 machine now. So I'm basically just setting up a few things in the background so that when we actually do the group policies for mapping network drive, there is actually a drive to be mapped and there's a user who can access it. Because if you don't have those things, it doesn't matter how well you do your group policies, it won't work. Okay, so it all comes back to access levels and so forth. So in this, in this case, this virtual machine, and someone else has been using it, obviously. Okay. This is someone else's, so I might just open up another virtual machine altogether. And there's the Windows 10. There it is. And we'll just have a look at where that is, Windows 10. All right, so we'll make it as part of the domain, the snapshot, and I copied it, and we'll power that on as well. So let's get back to what we're actually talking about. So I just want to make sure that we have the Windows 10. Windows 10. So let's actually go back to our server manager. So thus far, what we've been doing is just getting things ready So like I always say, the whole process is called, it's like cooking a soup. Before you can make have a soup, you need to prepare the onions and prepare the meat, prepare the vegetables. And what I've been doing was preparing the ingredients now. Now I've got the little ingredients. Now I can put it together in the group policies. So let's actually launch our group policy management. So group policy management, okay? So if you've, obviously this is an intro to group policies. We sort of looked at it when we did the password policy. So this is the tool, and it looks just like any other Microsoft tool in the sense that you've got containers on the left-hand side, and you got the contents of that container on the right-hand side. So if I go to domains, you can see there's our Active Directory domain, and we can explore it just like normal. And by default, there's two group policies: the default domain policy and also the default domain controllers policy. These two policies, if you look at it, is one's linked to the domain, which means, how does that work? That means that anyone that's inside the domain from this level down will get this group policy applied to them. You get me, guys? It's hierarchical when you apply group policies. You apply it to a container, and everyone below that container will get it. Okay? It doesn't go sideways, it doesn't go up, it doesn't go any direction, it just goes down, just like inheritance. Okay? So this default domain, it's called the default domain because it's there by default and it's for the whole domain, and anyone in the domain will get it, and that's why we put our password policy in that one. Okay? This is the default domain controllers policy, which is a special group policy specifically for domain controller computers. So even though the name group policies make it think like it's to do a group, really it's applied to containers like organizational units, domains, sites, etc. Okay, it's not to do with groups. So you can see that we've got our 4AWS organizational unit. Remember, that's where Gary, the user we were talking about, lives or is located. Before we even go there, there's a special container called group policy objects, and this is where the actual group policies reside. That's where they are. You notice that even though it's linked to the domain or linked to the domain controller's container, you can see there's a little sort of arrows, sort of almost signifying it's a shortcut, isn't it? They don't actually live there. They don't actually exist there. They exist in the group policy objects container here. There they are. And basically when we say we link it there, it means it's applied there. And it's applicable from there downwards. Okay, but just the same, we could actually link an existing GPO, let's say the default domain policy, to another place. So if we have a group policy object, we can link it to multiple locations if we wanted to. Okay, but getting back to what we want to do. Okay, when we're doing group policies or anything in IT, we have to have a clear picture of what we want to achieve. Okay, what we want to achieve in this example is to map a L drive automatically for users in the 4AWS organizational unit to a folder called student files, which has been shared. Okay, in order to do that, there must be a folder called student files that's shared correctly, and the person we want to map it to, or the group, the people that we want to map it for, they need to have some level of access to that folder. If you don't have any access, you can't map it, just like we know from manual mapping. So that's why I went, before we even getting to this point, I checked that we had this, we had that, and I created the groups and assigned the permissions and assigned the membership accordingly, preparing the ingredients for the soup. So right now, I want to create a group policy object that will map it. Okay, so I can do it one or two ways. I can go to the group policy objects here and just create a new one and link it later. Or I can just go to the area where I want to link it and just right click and create a group policy object in this domain and link it here. So it sort of does both steps in one go. Okay, either way is fine. Just understand that when you do this, you are creating a group policy object not here, but in that other container, but you're linking it here. Okay, so just to start off with, like, when we're learning stuff, we should try to make it as simple as possible. So when we're learning about something new, don't try to mix too many things up in one go. Because when something's working, how do you know this other thing's working or this other thing's not working? So do one thing at a time. So we could potentially put 20 different settings in the same group policy and get a result. But why don't we just do one thing at a time? So if this is to map L drive, we'll almost name it like that and just do that one specific thing. Just in the learning process. In the future, you can actually make it more difficult, make it more complicated, make a set of settings. For example, it could be a 4 AWS settings, which does 5 or 6 different things. But just as while you're learning, do one thing at a time and keep it separate. And also, when you put settings together, you have to make sure that all the settings have the same requirements, as in it's the same people that needs to be applied to, same computers, etc. Okay? So if I do this as a simple example, so here it is, it's actually linked. You can see it's linked there, but it's actually stored here. Okay, easy. So you guys will understand that part, right? So now let's go back to the 4AWS. You can see when I click on it, you can see that these are all the group policy objects that's linked here. And there is actually a link order. The link order is actually quite interesting because if you have multiple group policies linked in the same area, it's the order they get processed. Okay, so let's actually deal with the finish this off before we talk about the order of processing. What's the big deal about that? So in order to actually change the settings, we right click on it and select edit. Then we launch this group policy management editor. So we'll minimize everything else so that nothing else is confusing us in the background. But basically this group policy editor is where we change the settings. You can see straight away there's 2 major nodes, a computer configuration node and a user configuration node. Okay, what does that mean? If we do something in the computer configuration mode, it's going to follow the computers. Okay, so basically any computer which is in that container or lower, these settings will be applied to that computer, regardless of who's sitting on it. You get me, guys? Regardless who's logged in. Whereas just like if these are special computers like in the library, it doesn't matter who comes in and sits on them, they're going to get the same settings. If we do a configuration in the user configuration area, it follows the user. In the sense, if it's for our class here, it doesn't matter which computer you're sitting on, it will apply those settings to that particular computer you're sitting on. It follows the user around. You guys follow me with that? Okay, good. So in this case, we're going to look at drive mapping. So we're going to go to the preferences and we're going to go control panel. And all right, so maybe it's over here. So there's so many settings. Windows settings. That's right, here it is. There's so many settings I sometimes lose track of where it is, but sometimes you just play around, search a little bit, and with anything, if you don't know something, yeah, you do a bit of research, you find out. Okay, so it's drive mapping. It's a preference. We'll talk, the difference between a preference and a policy is that just like if you like to think of it, a policy is a rule, isn't it? Okay, you must not smoke inside the building. If that's a rule, can you break it? Yeah, you can, but you'd be in trouble, wouldn't you? That's right. A rule is something you have to follow. Okay. A preference. We prefer you not to talk in class, but if it's important, you can talk, can't you? So with these settings, if it's a policy, it means you must have this or you must do this. But if it's a preference, it means we'll give it to you. We prefer you to have this, but if you choose not to, you can change it. Okay, so basically preferences the user themselves can change or undo, but the policies is something that the user must do, must have. Okay, so drive mapping is a preference. So selecting drive mapping, I'll go to the right-hand side, I'll go new drive mapping, new map drive, and in this case, it's an update or create or replace or delete. So obviously create means create a new drive mapping that doesn't exist. Update, replace means you've got a currently mapped L drive, but we want to replace that with something else, another path. Update means just updating the drive mappings that you already have, and delete is getting rid of the drive mappings. Okay, so in this case, this person won't have a drive mapping, so we'll do create, and the location is basically the UNC path of the file. So we'll go to the we'll go to our browser, and the easiest way to actually find the UNC is to go // which starts off any UNC, your server name, server 1. You can also do IP addresses, but obviously in a normal network, IP address is not preferred. Name is preferred because IP addresses possibly can change, but names usually don't change. And even if we change IP addresses for the computer, we can update the DNS or update the IP address without changing the name. Okay. So if we look at this, the student files is what we want to map, isn't it? So if we double click into this and we go here, that gives you your UNC. I can just copy it, so I don't have to make any typos. So you can see that that is the UNC, Universal Naming Convention. And we can just paste it in right there. Okay, just like any drive mapping you may have done in the past. So this option is, do we reconnect? So basically you log off, you log back on, does it reconnect automatically? To be honest, we don't need to. Because if we actually log on to any time to the domain, this group policy is going to be downloaded to our client machine and it's going to be rerun, isn't it? So every time it's going to map it for us. So we don't need to reconnect it. This label is just like any drive letter label. It may be a description. In this case, I'm going to go student files for, I don't need it for, so that's pretty much a good description, isn't it? Student files. But you can actually be descriptive as you like. Okay, if this is where the forms live, maybe this is the forms. That might also be the name of the folder. So sometimes it's self-explanatory. This specifies which drive letter we use. By default, we can use the first available letter, which means hey, the next one is E, so that will be used. But if we want to make sure it's always the same drive letter, because we might use it in some sort of scripting or some sort of functions, we might say, hey, for this student files, so we use the L drive in TAFE, don't we? So we'll make it the same. So we'll make it the L drive. And obviously we don't need to do this connect as, because they're connecting as their own user account and they should have permissions. So I'll click OK to that. Okay, so that's a simple function, a simple preference, and it's done. Okay, now we've got that link to the full AWS organizational unit, which means that anyone that's inside of the full AWS unit, organizational unit, will get that group policy applied to them. And right now, there's only one user, isn't there? Gary. All right, so if we log on as Alex or Erful, we won't get it. But if we log on as Gary, we should get it. So let's switch over to our Windows 10 machine and see if this is working. Okay, so let's have a look. All right, I just want to check if this is actually part of a domain. Oh, yeah, it is. Okay, so let's log in as Gary Phillips. I believe that's his username. So let's quickly check. Account, G Phillips, and I assume the password is password 1, and I might just make it so he doesn't have to change his password, because I hate changing the password. I hate changing the password to something else. All right, so G Phillips, password 1. I think I typed that wrong, so let's try it again. No logon service available. Okay, so like I said, this computer was just restored to a snapshot. So just have to check that all the other settings are correct before we can actually do this demonstration. So I should have checked that before, but 192.168, yeah, that's okay. All right. We might test something. NS lookup server 1.w2k16ad.local. Okay, remember what I said, no DNS, no active directory. So what I'm doing here is doing an NS lookup for the server, and I'm asking the question, and it's actually not responding. So basically, I need to check my DNS is correct, which should be correct. Let me see if I can ping the IP address. Okay. It's unreachable. This is not a good time to have in my demonstrations, so that's okay. That's on VMnet too. I've been stuffing around, haven't I? I've been messing around with things to demonstrate things. I'll put it on a VMnet 2 where host only is VMnet 1, if you remember. So because it's on VMnet 1, it couldn't ping it because it's a different, effectively, network. Now it can. All right, because it's on the right network now. And if I do the NS lookup, it's good. So now, hopefully, I can sign out and sign in as that G Phillips. Okay, so as you can imagine, you're going to bump into all sorts of little problems in real life. And that was one that I should have taken care of before we started the demonstration, but such is life. But hopefully I've resolved the issue. Okay, so other issues now. So remember how I restored this workstation to a snapshot? Remember how I mentioned how if we got the two computers and they're out of sync or they haven't logged on too long, you get that error, which is it's lost this trust relationship with the domain. And to fix that easily, we go and basically take it out of if it's not a domain controller, it's easy. You just take it out of the domain. And you rejoin it. So administrator password 1 is the old password. Yep, here we go. And basically restart your computer and join it back into the domain. So you can see how that's frustrating. So that's what I was saying in your assignment. If you make a snapshot, make it all your virtual machines at the same time. But if you restore a snapshot, you restore all the virtual machines at the same time. Okay? Otherwise, you get this problem. It's unfortunate that during my demonstrations got this problem, but at least you guys are seeing some troubleshooting techniques happening right now. And hopefully you're taking note of what I'm doing, what I'm checking. It's always confirming the basics. And now I joined the domain to fix that up. So right click on PC, change settings, change, and the domain is w2k16ad.local. And administrator is password free now. Yes, I'm in the domain. Now, basically doing that, I've re-established the trust between the two computers. And now, after another reboot, unfortunately it's Windows, Microsoft usually likes us to reboot all these things. You'll find that in Linux, you probably won't have to reboot half as much as what you do with Windows computers. But we'll just wait. Sorry guys, it's taking so long. All right. But you know what? It's just this length of time actually is helpful for us in the sense that with the group policy objects, when we make changes, it actually has to be sent to this client computers. So sometimes they can take up to 90 to 120 minutes to do that. So by actually spending some time troubleshooting, we may have allowed that synchronization to happen. Okay, so now we've logged in as G Phillips. And again, another annoying thing is the first time we logged into this computer is going to walk through this setup of your very first time. Okay, so hopefully that doesn't take too long. It says it won't take. This won't take long. Let's see. Because we reset the snapshots at different times. Okay, so basically your two computers are not on the same stage, if you like. One is actually at this date, one is gone back in time, if you like. Okay, So that's why it's lost its trust relationship. So that's to do with a snapshot problem. Okay, that's a common snapshot problem, guys. But if now I'm logged in, if I actually go to my drive, well, why is it signing out? Okay, let's sign back in again. All right. All right, so now you can see that there's the L drive. Okay, it's automatically mapped for us, and that's showing me that the group policies has worked. All right, if I actually go into L drive, because I've got only read, write, and execute for read and execute, you'll see that I can't put any files there. Okay. If you remember, I said that because this group policy was only on the 4AWS organizational unit, anyone else who's outside of that, let's say the 5ICW people, Alex and Erfel, shouldn't be getting that group policy settings, should they? Okay, so let's test this. So we'll go in here and we'll log off as G Phillips, and we'll log on as another user, a user from the other organizational unit. All right, so we'll log on as other user, and it's a Zhao, I believe. That's my name. Let's check. So that's the dude. And that's the account. Again, I'm not going to change my password because I hate changing the password. And the password should be password 1. I'm changing my password 2 now. Okay. So basically, what do we expect? We expect this guy, again, we'll go through the mini setup because it's a new user on this Windows 10, unfortunate. But what we expect, it should not have the L drive mapped. Okay. The reason for that is because we applied the group policy, which is doing the drive mapping to the 4AWS organizational unit, whereas this user comes from the 5ICW organizational unit. Okay, so that's what we expect. So if you see that, there's the guy I'm trying to log on as, and that is inside the 5ICW. Whereas if you look at my group policies, the one that's mapping group policies, mapping drives, is actually applied to the AWS organizational unit. All right, cancelled that this time, so we don't have to log out and log in again. So if we go to the drives, we've got at my home directory, the H drive, but no L drive. Okay, so you guys with me, followed me with that content. All right, so that's just one example of group policy working, and in our worksheet we'll see a lot more. But let's go back here and we'll have a look at something else. So here's the group policy. If I wasn't sure what's in the group policy and I was checking your work or you're checking your own work, I can actually go to settings, and it actually gives me a sort of a breakdown, a display of what's been configured. Oh, come on. Why is, yeah, here we go. It's what it's configured is that L drive, so drive mapping, is mapped to this UNC path. Okay, so that just quickly shows me what the group policy is doing. If I click on the default domain policy in the settings, you show me all the things that's configured in the default domain policies. Okay, with this, all right, with this drive mapping, okay, you can see it, like we said, it's applied to everyone in AWS. Okay. If we look at for AWS, there's students. Let's actually create another global group now, GG. If there's students, there's lecturers, right? We've been using that sort of scenario quite a lot. And I'll create a new user, and his name is, we'll call him Ben, last name Jones. It's very hard making up these fictitious names. Okay, B Jones. All right, password 1. All right, so if I add this to a group, so this person is a lecturer, so I'm going to add it to the GG lecturers group. Easy enough to understand? What, and obviously we need a DL, we need another group now. We need a domain local group that gives this lecturer access to the student files. So student files, we'll give a modify, okay? And we'll add this GG. We'll add the lecturer group here. All right, and then obviously in our permissions, we have to assign the right permissions. So shares, there's the student files, we'll go properties, and we'll go to security, and now we'll add the DL lecturers, DL student files modify, and we'll give it modify as well. And everything underneath pretty much. Modify means everything underneath. So we've again created ingredients. So let's say that this drive mapping will obviously, it will affect everyone for AWS. Now that includes Ben Jones and Gary Phillips. But let's just change the scenario a bit. Okay, what if we don't want to map it for students and we just want to map it for lecturers? Do we have to redesign everything? We could just create another organizational unit for students and lecturers and link the organization, the group policy to that organizational unit that we want to apply it to. But what we can do is actually do what's called filtering. Okay, now in our worksheets we'll do that, but let's actually edit, go to scope with this. Right now it's set to all authenticated users, which means anyone who can log in will be able to get this as long as they're inside the organizational unit where we've linked this. Okay, that's what it means. We don't want that. We don't want all authenticated users. We want specifically lecturers. We just spoke about that, right? So this is where we use the global groups. Okay, global groups represents a type of person. So in this case, it's the GG lecturers. All right. So now we've said that this group policy will only apply to people who are members of this group. You get me, guys? So we can actually tweak our group policies, make it more specific. So we could have a general policy, but make it more specific to the people we want to apply it to now. And besides doing that, we have other filtering as well. Okay, there's what's called a WMI filtering, which means we can actually, hey, maybe we don't want to run this on every computer there is. Maybe we only want to run it on a Windows 10 computer, or we only want to run it on a computer with 16 gigs of RAM or more. Okay, there might be some settings that we only want to run or do to specific computers that meet a certain operating system requirement, hardware requirement, or other requirements. And that's where we use WMI filtering to determine that. But right now, we're just doing something really easy. We're saying that, hey, this now will only apply to lecturers. Okay, that group GG lecturers. So now, hopefully, what we'll do is we'll log out of this. Who we're logged in as now? We're logged in as Alex, aren't we? He doesn't get a drive mapping because he's totally from another thing. So let's actually log off this guy. Okay, and the other thing about group policies is that if it's a user policy, like we talked about, it's applied when a user logs in. Okay, you can't just switch users. It's when they log in. If it's a computer policy, it's when the whole computer starts up. Okay, so basically, depending on what type of policy, you have to determine when and how to test it. So we'll log in as G Phillips again. So remember, he was a student user, and what we're expecting now, hopefully, is that he doesn't have the L drive anymore. Why is that? Why doesn't he have the L drive anymore? Yes, is he a member of the lecturers group? No, that's why he doesn't get it. Okay, so that's sort of worked, hasn't it? That's what we mean by you have an idea what you want to do, you make a change, you go and test to see if that changed. Don't do too many changes in one go, one thing at a time. That's why you know if what you've done is working or not. Okay, sometimes it's painfully slow, but that's how you troubleshoot, one thing at a time. All right, so now obviously we created that user called Ben Jones, didn't we? Ben Jones is a lecturer. Okay, unfortunately Ben Jones has never logged into here again previously, so again we're going to have that problem of waiting for that to happen. So let's actually log in as B Jones, password 1, and we're going to go through this again, unfortunately, so bear with it. All right, so our theory now is that, hey, we've changed that group policy so that only lecturers will get the L drive mapping to student files. G Phillips or Gary Phillips is not a lecturer, so didn't have L drive, but this Ben Jones is a member of GG lecturers and now should have the drive mapping L drive. All right, and there you go, the drive mapping. And because he's a lecturer, he has modified now, and now, we won't do that. Now we'll go new file and it lets us because of the NTFS permissions that we set. Okay, guys, you guys all followed me with what my examples just then. Sorry, I'll go back to my example. So one last couple other things. So we're going to do a lot more in our worksheets. Okay, this is just an example. There's so many things we can configure. But besides doing that, what if we don't, there's also this delegations tab. This is basically assigning permissions to this group policy. So right now, domain admins have edit settings, delete, modify security of this group policy. This GG lecturers can read. So you need, if you want to apply, you need to have at least read. Okay, by default, when you apply a group policy to an organizational unit, that organizational unit has the read permissions to that group policy object. Okay, but you can also add, just like the permissions, we can add more. So we can actually add, see if we can find someone else. Let's find production workers. We can make, doesn't make sense in our scenario now, but let's just say this group. What permissions does this group do we want to give to this person? This group. We can read, which is the minimum you can have in order to apply it. We can edit settings. What does that mean? That means they can actually change the settings of the group policy. Remember that path we put in? They can change it to a different path. Delete, modify, they can actually delete the whole group policy object or modify, change the security settings like what we're doing now. So we'll click OK to that, but we can actually get in and, okay, sorry. We can go to advanced and we can do a little bit more. So remember there's the production. So besides the allow rules, allow permissions, we can also have deny permissions. So maybe if this is a group of people in the same organizational unit that we don't want to actually be able to apply this group policy, we might have deny apply group policy. So basically an exception, isn't it? Okay. We can also do it here. So remember how we had these groups? Sorry. We have these things here. We've got the settings here. And what if we want to test something? Obviously the best way to test something is to actually log into the client computer and see the results. But what if you don't have that ability? We can actually have group policy modeling and group policy results, which allows us to actually get a theoretical, it will do the calculations for us, and it will actually tell us if what is going to apply. Because what if someone gets a lot of group policies? Okay, so we can go through this wizard, and let's say this computer. No, we're gonna find a computer. Find now. So that's all the computers in Active Directory, but why is it taking so long? So let's have a look at the computer objects. Bob's PC. Now I need to know which computer which computer this is now. This is Windows 10, okay? So we'll switch back to the server. So it's the Windows 10 client. So we'll pretend we're sitting there. Sorry, which that's no computer, Windows 10 client. Due to okay, let's just stick with this computer. And which is the user? Specify a specific user. Display user. All right. All right. And we can actually then see what group policies is applied to this particular user. In this case, we can then look at the computer policies and so forth. Okay, I'm spending a little bit too much time on this demonstration rather than going through the theory, but a lot of that you'll be doing in your worksheets anyway. Okay, so let's continue on. So a lot of this theory now will be quick because obviously I've shown you and talked about it as we're doing it. So what is configuration management? Configuration management is a centralized approach for applying one or more changes to one or more users or computers. The key elements of configuration management is the settings, the scope, and the application. So what does that mean? We're using group policy, and in the group policy we have settings. The scope is who's it applied to. Okay, in the scope, when we put it attached to an organizational unit, who it applies to is everyone in that organizational unit. If we then limit it with the filtering to a specific group, then the scope is that particular group. Whoever's a member of that group, that's also in that organizational unit. So we can make a scope really big by putting it right on the top of the domain, which is what the default domain policy is. Or we can make it really specific by finding a specific OU that's in the whole hierarchy and maybe limiting it with filtering for that specific group. Then application, how is those configuration applied? Okay, we saw that in our example of the group policy settings. The most granular component of group policy setting is known as the policy, and it defines a specific configuration change. Okay, it could be one or many settings. In our example, was only one setting, and that was for the drive mapping. Okay, but there's thousands, literally thousands of different settings you could have configured. And with these thousands of settings, there's free states, there's not configured, enabled, or disabled. Okay, what does that mean? Not configured is just like every setting that we just looked at in our group policy just then, except for the drive mapping. That's the only one that was configured. If it's not configured, there's no settings for it. Enabled means it's configured and is turned on. That's a particular setting. Okay, so it means it's applicable. And the third one is that it's disabled, which means it's configured, but it's been turned off. So it's not applicable. Okay, let me see if I can quickly show you this. So if we look at our group policy, if we edit that again and we go to policies, let's go to administrative templates, let's go to control panel, add remove programs, for example. So can someone add remove programs to their computers? And one of them is hide the Windows components page. Okay, so people can't even get to the Windows components page, okay, on their computers. If we actually edit this, right now it's not configured. No settings has been given. If we enable it, it means this setting is turned on. If we disable it, means it's turned off. Okay, you get that, guys? So if we enable it and we click OK, hide, add, remove components, and if we go off and test it, it will be, the first thing is it's actually under the, now I'm just going a little bit crazy. It's under the, I think the, let's check. Where did I do it? Now I forgot where I actually did it. I reckon it definitely was there. Let me just quickly check. Oh, did I do up here? So it was on that window. It was on that. So I did it on this map shouldn't drive. So now that just makes that policy wrong, doesn't it? Because that's not what it's just doing. But you have to understand now, because I've changed that, now every setting that I've changed on that still only applies to people who are in the global group lecturers for AWSOU. Okay, let's get back to our PowerPoint. So many policy settings are complex, and the effect of enabling or disabling them might not be obvious. Okay, you might not really understand what does that mean. Okay, so with every policy setting, there's usually an explanation. Okay, so if we actually open this up again, I keep on switching back and forth. But if I actually go to that same place that we did just then, this one, you can see when I click on it, there's actually a description here. The description is removes the add remove Windows components button from the add removes progress bar. Okay, so it goes on. So there's a bit of a description, and hopefully you understand that. And obviously there's thousands of settings, like I said, and there's many complex ones that you may not understand. So do a bit of research before you implement anything. So have an idea what you want to do, research what settings you need to alter, and understand how the effects of it goes. Benefits of using group policies. Group policies are very powerful administrative tools and can be used to enforce various types of settings on a large number of users and computers. That's the main benefit, isn't it? I don't have to go to every one of your accounts and computers and map the DL drive. It does it for me when you log in. Easy, doesn't it? All right, typically group policies are used in the following ways. Applying security settings. For example, our password policy was a security setting, plus many other things. Manage desktop application settings. So if configuration settings such as your desktop image. Deploy applications or software. So in our worksheet, we'll see that we can actually install software onto these client computers by using group policies. Having a installation file here, but then forcing these computers to install that software. Okay. Making folder redirections. So for example, we have our My Documents, My Videos, all those things under your profile. But what if we want to, instead of keeping it on this local computer, because everyone, what they do is they just save their work to My Documents, don't they? Typically. So instead of keeping it on the local computer where it's not protected or not backed up, if we use folder redirection, we could redirect it to their home directories. Remember last term when we talked about home directories? We could potentially redirect it to home directories, which might be on a share that's on the server, which is backed up. Okay, so all their work that they've been saving to My Documents ends up being on their home directory and backed up. We can also configure their network settings, like their firewall, the ability to change TCP/IP addresses, and many other examples. A GPO is a container for one or more policy settings, and we manage it with the Group Policy Management Console, and they're stored in containers, in the GPO containers. We edit them with the Group Policy Management Editor, and we apply it to a specific level on the Active Directory hierarchy. And if you look at this picture, this is basically what I showed you before. Two major nodes, the computer or the user. Computer applies to computers, obviously, regardless who's sitting on it. Users apply to the users, regardless of which computer you're sitting on. The idea of the group policy scope is that the scope of a group policy object is the collection of users and computers that will get this setting. Okay, the users and computers that will get this setting depends on where it's applied on the hierarchy. Okay, and what filtering you have. Okay, you can have several methods of you can use several methods to scope the group policy. You can link it to a container. The higher you link in the hierarchy, the more people it's going to apply to. The more specific you link it on the hierarchy, the less people. Then we can use filtering, just like what I showed you there, by filtering it to a specific group, and that narrows it again. And then I also spoke about how we can use WMI filters, which actually queries your computer that it's going to be applied to, and based on that result of that query, it works out whether it's applied or not. For example, in our worksheet, either today or next lesson, we're going to be installing Firefox on only Windows 10 computers. Not the server 16, only the Windows 10. So basically it's going to query, the computer is processing it, what is your operating system, what is your version, And if it fits the one we said, it's going to be applied. So again, narrows the scope of who's applied it to. Group policy client and client-side extension. So group policy client retrieves the GPO. So the group policy objects obviously lives on the server, the domain controller, okay? And when we actually log in, it actually downloads the group policy objects from the domain controllers to the client computers. The client downloads and caches the GPO. So the a key word there is caches. Caches means stores temporarily, okay? The client-side extensions process the settings, but because it caches it, what if you make a change now? If this guy's logged in and you make a change on the group policy settings that affects him or his computer, well, I've got my version, you've got your version, doesn't mean that that policy will automatically update me here. So policy settings on the computer configuration node are applied to the system on startup and every 90 to 120 minutes thereafter. So basically, if we actually already logged in and started up, it won't apply to us again for up to 120 minutes. So what I want you to do is remember 90 to 120 minutes. Because guess what? That's going to be a theory test question, okay? Yep. You can force it. That's what we're going to talk about later. So this is where we just let the natural process occur, okay? This is not anything we do manually. This is just in the background. It's going to update 90 to 120 minutes after you make a potentially after you make a change. Same with the user configuration. But like Dragan said, what if you want to see something happen straight away? There is a command that we can run. Okay, so I might just show you this command. It wouldn't make too much of a difference on our client computers because they were applying. But if I go to the client computer and I start up a command prompt, I can do what's called a GP update. Okay, obviously group policy update. And that will just do a normal group policy update, but I can also force it with a /force. And what that actually does is actually forces it to check with the server to see if there's any changes to the settings and reapply the group policies. Artem? No. So there's nothing you can run on the domain controllers to force all the client computers to run the group policies. I suppose you can force them to all shut down and restart. You can do that, but that might be very annoying to the person who's sitting on the computer. Okay, so to be honest, in a normal working environment, okay, like if I make a change, doesn't matter if the normal user doesn't get it for up to 120 minutes. Probably not most of the situation, and over time they'll get the setting changes. Not a big deal. It's only in the lab environment when we do something and we want to see the results of it straight away that we may want to do this force because we're eager. We're too eager. We want to see something happening in front of our eyes. But if I just change the desktop image from this TFSA image to another TFSA image because it's a new one, doesn't matter if they don't get it until tomorrow? Probably not. Not that important, okay? But Artem, if you're really important update or to the settings, to the group policy setting, not anything else, you can remotely turn off all those computers on your domain or restart all those computers, but that could be very annoying to the person who's actually sitting there. All right, so we've already demonstrated creating the group policy, so we'll bypass that and let's continue on. So here's the group policy management tool. Okay, it's hierarchical. You can see that it's typical MMC, Microsoft Management Console, with a a left side pane and a right side pane. The left side pane shows you all the containers and the things. When you click on it, it shows you the contents on the right hand side. Okay, we've sort of used this in my demonstrations already, so no big deal. So where the group policy object storage. So the group policy objects contains the policy settings, and it's stored in stores content in two locations. It stores in a group policy container, which is stored on the Active Directory domain services and provides version information. But there's also a group policy template, which is stored in a sysvol or system volume and provides the group policy settings. So basically, all those things that we just used, they didn't just invent themselves, they were stored somewhere. And when we create a new one, they are loaded from that and created from that. There's also what's called starter GPOs, so which stores administrative templates settings on which the new GPO is based. So if we've got the setting, it's pretty much exactly what we want, except for a few differences. Maybe we can create our own starter GPOs, and we can export it as a CAB file, and then it can be imported to other areas of the enterprise. Okay. Nathan, can I get you to close the door? So we can export the starter GPO as a CAB file and import it somewhere else, in another domain, in the forest, or something like that. What we can also do with GPOs is we can actually back it up, just like anything. Like we just create one GPO that took a bit of time, but just imagine we had a really complicated system of group policy objects, and it's here, it's there. All the settings we configured is perfect now. We don't want to redo that work again, do we? So what we can do is we can actually back up the group policy objects, and we can also restore it, just like a backup process. Okay, but this is done inside the group policy management, okay, not as a Windows backup. Okay, we can also copy GPOs or import GPOs. There's the delegations. I showed you that in our demonstration. There's with every group policy object, there's a delegation tab, and that effectively is how you assign permissions. Okay, remember I could give someone, if I'm the administrator for a very large network and I don't really want to deal with every itsy bitsy problem, maybe I'll go, hey, there's a GG help desk operators, global group for help desk operators. And sorry, there's a group called for help desk, there's a group of people called help desk operators. Maybe I'll want them to deal with this level of problems. So maybe I'll delegate, instead of giving them full control as administrator, I'll delegate so that that group has the ability to modify, create, delete group policy objects, just like I showed you before as sort of a quick demonstration. So don't forget, just because we know about file systems and permissions in a file system, but there's permissions everywhere. In Active Directory, giving someone else the ability to create and change objects in Active Directory, group policy, again, permissions. Okay, files, permissions, there's all sorts of access control lists everywhere. These are some of the following tasks that can be delegated, or you can give these permissions to someone else: creating GPOs, editing, managing where the GPOs are linked, performing group policy modeling analysis, reading the group policy results in the domain or organization units, creating group WMI filters in a domain. So remember, those are the filters where we query the operating system and the computers. In addition to obviously the graphical user interface that we've been using to create GPOs and link them and do modify the settings, guess what? Just like I've been saying, anything you can do with graphical user interface, you can do with PowerShell. And here's an example. You can create a new GPO called sales, and the comment, or it's basically the description, and you can actually import. Here's some examples, but basically everything we've done just before you can do with PowerShell. Obviously, you learn how to do it first in the graphical, understand how it works, and then work out the PowerShell when you do need it. Let's talk about processing order. Okay, what if we have multiple GPOs? Okay, so in our example, so let me just switch over to my example before. So if we look at our group policy here, so basically for people in this 4AWS organizational unit, okay, Gary, okay, Gary being inside of here, let's talk about, instead of Gary, Ben Jones, he lives in here. And basically, you've got this default domain policy, which flows down, doesn't it? Because that's sort of through inheritance. Okay. You've got this one, which is explicitly linked to that organizational unit that guy's Ben Jones is in. And in fact, it's got a group which Ben Jones is in as well, and is affected to him. So what happens if they've got settings that conflict with each other? What if this default domain policy says map L drive as this share, and in this one we say map L drive as this other share? What happens? Okay, so basically understanding the processing order Oops. Understanding the processing order is very important. Okay, in here, in this case, there's two: default domain, security settings, but the link order, the order is all important. Okay, so let me just give you an example, just an analogy, and forget about group policies for a second. We'll give you an analogy. Okay, so we have this room. Okay, so what if on Monday I tell Nathan to come into this room and paint the walls red? Okay, and on Tuesday I tell MD here to come in and paint this red green, and we're here on Wednesday. What color is the walls in this room? Green, right? Because it doesn't matter what he said previous, this other one which came later superseded it, didn't it? Overridden it. All right, so basically the processing order is built like that. You do something here, but if you got something else that comes afterwards that does something which is different, directly opposing it, or exactly the same setting, it overrides it. If it's a different situation, like for example, I tell Nathan to come into this room on Monday and paint the walls red, and I tell MD to come in on Tuesday and paint the roof green, on Wednesday we come in, we'll have a red walls and green roof, because they're not directly opposing each other, are they? Because they're different settings, if you like. One's for the roof, one's for the walls. They're not the same things. So it's cumulative. The settings are cumulative if you have multiple settings which affect different settings. But if it's affecting the same settings, the processing order is important. It means whatever's applied later is usually more specific and overrides something that's coming up earlier, which is less specific in general. Okay, so let's have a look at this picture. So basically, what is the order? So basically, the local policies is applied first. What are local policies? Local policies are the policies on the computer you're sitting on. Okay, they're not group policies, they're local policies. They're applied first. Then it's the policies, any policies applied to the whole site. Then the domain, then the organizational units in their hierarchy. Is that a question there? No, no. All right, so it's in that order. Okay, so obviously, if I say paint the walls red here, and I say paint the walls green here, because this comes later, the walls when I see it will be green, right? You guys get that, guys? So this is the order, LSDOU. Okay, so maybe try to remember that, because you'll find that you'll have some questions like this in the test. Okay, that's the order by default if all things are equal. But what if I have a setting that's up here, right at the early stages, the default domain setting, okay? And I've got settings down here. But what if this is so important I don't want it to be overridden? Okay, why? So what if this is so important? I can do what's called enforce it. Okay, if I enforce it, it means it cannot be overridden and it'll go all the way through. Okay. What if I have an organizational unit here and I'm getting some normal settings up here from another GPO, but I don't want it to affect this organizational unit? Okay, it's a setting that's not appropriate for this organization unit at a lower level. So what I can do is I can actually block inheritance. Okay, if I block inheritance, it means it will block anything that's coming down from a higher level to this organizational unit. Okay, so it doesn't get those settings. Now, what if I have one that's enforced up here and I've got block inheritance down here? What do you think happens? They're enforced. If it's enforced, it must go through, regardless of any blocking. Okay, so it'll go through any blocking anyway. All right, we'll do this later on, but let me just quickly show you. So there's the default policy. If we actually look at this, we can actually enforce it. See that? Okay. Here's an organizational unit at a lower level. If we wanted to, we can actually block inheritance. Okay. Using security filtering to modify group scope. So basically, I've shown you that when we use the group filtering to add a group. So applying group policy permissions. So GPO has an ACL delegation tab, and by default, all authenticated users are allowed to read it. Okay. If you want to scope only the users, you can actually use global groups as to filter, like we did just before, for that specific group. We can also scope users to accept in those selected groups as well. So on the delegation tab, we can actually click advanced, and we can add the appropriate global groups, and then we can also configure deny apply policy permission for a specific user or a specific group. Okay, so we can do exceptions like that. Okay, it's a combination. That's one way of doing it. So hey, if you look at your assignment, you'll notice that one of the group policies is to do a background image, except for Evan Zerfel, because he's the CEO and he doesn't want it. Guess what? That's exactly what you do with the delegation or with the exception. Okay. So we talked about WMI filtering. So WMI filtering is where we query the client and find out information about the client and decide whether this group policy will be applied to that client or not. Here's an example. This is actually a Windows XP filter, which means that it's going to ask the client, what's your operating system? And if it's Windows XP, you'll either get this policy or you won't get this policy. So in this case, here's the name, but here's the string. If you, it's very hard to read the string. It's very hard to understand the string, and it's definitely impossible almost to type this string manually. So if you need to do a filter like this, I would personally look for example. You'll find plenty of examples around the place. Okay, and in this case, the way to read it is select anything. The star means anything from where the Windows 32 operating system, the caption, which means basically a label, says Windows XP, Professional, and when the version is Service Pack free. In our example, we're going to look a little bit different, do a little bit different, but it basically achieves the same things. But how you do it, as long as it works and as long as it does, it's sort of almost foolproof in the sense that it can't be fooled by another operating system. Like it's quite easy to confuse Windows 2016 and Windows 10. Okay, because like I said, Windows Server 2016 is basically Windows 10 Server. So you'll see that when we actually do the WMI filtering, we'll actually adjust the version number with the type to get a different version. All right, so we can actually enable or disable GPOs in the node. So obviously, why do we want to do this? We've got a group policy. It's already done. It's linked there. It's working. But what if I don't want to have it for now? I can unlink it. I can delete it. But that seems like a waste of work, doesn't it? Because what if it's just temporary? So what I can do instead is I can just disable it. Disable it means turn it off. Okay, it means it won't be applied. So right now I'll turn it off, but maybe in weeks time I'll turn it back on. I don't have to go through the whole process of redesigning, recreating, relinking the group policy object again. I can just turn it back on. Okay, it's still there. Turn it back on or turn it off. Okay, that's what it's talking about. There's a loopback processing. Okay, this is a special one. This is really to do with processing of the group policies. So basically, by default, what happens is that you process the computer policies first, then you process the user policy afterwards. Remember I said the two nodes, computer and user? So computer first, then user policies. But what if, again, there's some things in the computer policy that's maybe overwritten by the user policy. What loopback processing does is actually it makes it so that after you've applied your user policy, it goes back and applies the computer policy again. Okay, and then you have a choice of how do you want to process that? Do you want to replace the settings or do you want to merge the settings? Okay, so obviously replace gets rid of the whatever settings there and replace it. Merge means combines both settings together. What if you're logging in from a computer which is not directly attached to LAN? What does that mean? Normally we're on the LAN, we have gigabit network, don't we? That's really quick comparatively. What if you're on a dial-up connection? Okay. What if you're on a dial-up connection and your connection is relatively slow? Okay, so the speeds we're talking about here is pretty slow. So if, for example, there's some things we do with our group policies that require a lot of data transfer, like let's say we're installing this new software and I've just dialed in with my 3G network that's hotspotted to my phone through the thing, through VPN, and I've actually logged into the domain now. If I did that, it would not be very good to download a 500 meg installation file through the network to my computer, through the WAN to my computer, and install the installation file. First of all, it could blow my data download. Secondly, it would be very slow. So therefore, I might have a rule that says, hey, if this link is detected as a slow link, then don't do certain things. Okay, so this is what the slow link detection is all about. So this is where we define the speed that we consider a slow link. Okay, so anything less than gigabit, maybe. All right, so if we say, instead of gigabit, maybe we do 500 megabits. Okay, and if obviously your 3G connection, like here's one, you always treat 3G connections as a slow link, but obviously we've got 4G connections as well. But even 4G connections are probably not less than gigabit, aren't they? So therefore, we can specify what we define as a slow link, and if it's a slow link, then some of those things, like we talked about, won't be implemented. Identifying when the settings become effective. So GPO replication must happen. Remember, I said if you're logged in on a computer, and I've made a change to the settings on GPO on the domain controller, you don't automatically get that straight away. What happens is that if you're already logged in, it will update the settings every 90 to 120 minutes. Okay, so that's why it says GPO replication must happen before you actually see the effects. So group changes must be replicated. So if you were a member of that GG lecturers group, now I've taken you out and put you in another group. So that membership has to be replicated across all the domain controllers first before you get the changes. Okay. A group policy refresh must occur. User must log off or log on to the computer, or the computer must restart, or we can manually refresh by using that GP update command that we spoke about just before. Most client-side extensions do not reapply unchanged GPO settings. So if they haven't changed, no big deal. Leave it as is. If they have changed, they will apply it. Considerations for managing group policies in a multi-domain environment. So if there's multiple domains, okay, remember a domain is a trust boundary. Okay, what's in the domain is trusted, what's outside the domain is not trusted. So in a domain trust is required for simplifying the multi-domain management of group policies. Use migration tables to automate and update the UNC's paths and security principles. Remember how we just mapped the L drive just then? That had a specific UNC path, didn't it? Okay, well, let's say we want to apply the same group policy settings on this other domain, but they don't have necessarily server one. They might have another server. Their names might be different, but the shares might be the same. So with what's a migration table is actually it replaces specific parts of that path from this to this. And that basically means that you can easily transfer or export and import your group policy settings from one domain to another domain without having to go through and change everything. Wherever server 1 appears here, you'll replace with server 26 over here, effectively. That's what a migration table does, okay? Common group policy management techniques are valid across domains, including copying GPOs, importing GPOs, backupping and restoring group policies. Multi-domain environments may be made up of an internal test implementation of Active Directory and a production environment. So basically, when you have multi-domains, one situation could be you have a production network, which is what the regular users use. But you might have a test network or a development network, which is where you actually experiment. And basically, by having this experiment network, we don't want the experiments to sort of affect the real network, do we? That's why we have a separate network. So basically, in that situation, we could easily just Yeah, instead of doing it on the live network, the production network, any changes or tests, we can actually copy all the GPOs, import it here, and test it on the production. On the test network instead of the production network. All right, so let's have a look at this, refreshing GPOs. So when you apply a GPO, remember that your computer settings are applied during the startup of the computer, not just logging off and logging back on, restarting the whole computer. User settings are applied on logon, so we log off and log back in. And policies are refreshed at regular configurable intervals. Security settings are refreshed at least every 16 hours. Policies can be refreshed manually by using the group GP update command, or we can use the group PowerShell command invoke GP update. To be honest, they both do the same thing, and GP update has less characters, so I tend to use that more than the invoke GP update. And with a new remote, there's also, so what Artem was saying, there's a new remote policy refresh feature that's in Server 2012, and you can remotely refresh the policies. And with the Windows Server 2000 provides you with tools for analysis. So that's in the group policy results wizard and the group policy modeling. So instead of actually jumping on a computer and actually seeing the results, you can actually go to this modeling, which actually uses the rules that we talked about. What if this was linked first, this linked second, and so forth, and it combines all the results and it actually shows you what policies applied to your user account sitting on a specific computer. And here's an example of a resulting set of a policies report. And you can see that in this case, there's a computer called a domain called a datum, and there's a computer called London-CO1, and these are the policies that's applied. And obviously, with anything, you can troubleshoot if there's something that doesn't work properly. We can troubleshoot it, and one of the best places to start with troubleshooting is in event logs. We spoke about the event logs quite a bit previously, and there's a specific event log for group policies as well. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation. So what I want you to do is actually work on your worksheet for today. So there's actually two lessons on group policies. Today's worksheet is worksheet 4. Next lesson we'll have worksheet 5, but we'll discuss a few more things about group policies. But by the end of these two worksheets, you should be able to do the group policy and password policy settings part of your assignment. And that's where your next milestone is. So by the end of this week, besides getting what you meant to have done from last week, you should be able to do all the group policy settings as well. And that's where you should be targeting. All right.